Good afternoon. Welcome to the Brussels office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for our second live interview series. We are happy to welcome back Katharina von Schnurbein, coordinator for the dialogue with the Commission, with churches, religions, and non-confessional and philosophical organizations, but also coordinator on combating anti-Semitism for the European Commission. Thank you, Katharina. This is actually the second time that Katharina is here. The first time we were made aware of technical challenges with our audio. So we're happy for those who joined again to be with us, and thank you again, Katharina. So the purpose of these interviews is to ask you about yourself, your roles and responsibilities in these two positions, and share with our audience the important work that you do. And for those of you who are watching, feel free to ask questions by leaving a comment, and we will be happy to bring those questions to the attention of Katharina. So Katharina, to start, could you please share a little bit about yourself and your position and your past experiences and what brought you to your current roles?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. I have been working for the European Commission since 2002. I started before the accession of the Central European countries, former communist countries, to the EU in Prague as a spokesperson there, and then moved as the spokesperson of the first Czech Commissioner in 2004 to Brussels. And I thought I was going to come here only for a short time. Then I met my husband here. Now we have 4 children, and then I changed after the first Barroso Commission at the end of the mandate of that commissioner for whom I was working into the advisory team of President Barroso. In part of that, the responsibility there was the dialogue with churches, religions, philosophical, non-confessional organizations, and that I started in 2012. I've been doing it now for 5.5 years, and I have to say it's been very exciting. And since December 2015, I'm also the coordinator responsible for combating anti-Semitism at the Commission.
Just to keep you a little busier than usual. Well, let's start with your role as coordinator for dialogue with churches, religions, and philosophical non-confessional organizations. Can you tell us about the Dialogue Article 17 and how this is important for the work of the European Commission, but also the recent news that you just shared with us a few days ago?
Yeah, well, the recent news is that my time as coordinator for this dialogue is coming to a close at the end of July. I have really enjoyed it a lot. I think it is a very special possibility within the European Commission to discuss EU policy with organizations and with people who have a wider outlook on life and on society. So you discuss environmental policy, or you discuss social policies, you discuss migration, integration. You can also discuss questions of values, of living together, of diversity. But usually the interlocutors come with a broader perspective. So they don't just represent the interests of their own constituency, and this is what makes it very special. And I think this is also what is appreciated by the politicians, in particular by First Vice President Timmermans, who's responsible for this dialogue, that this wider outlook also then points at more holistic solutions.
Well, Katharina, thank you for sharing this. I can say that the work that you have done has been very much appreciated as coordinator, and that was, I think, underlined by the participation of the guests during the last dialogue at the Commission. So thank you for all you have done. But still on the work of the Article 17, on this dialogue, what are the challenges, in your opinion, in the implementation of the Article 17 of the treaty?
Well, I mean, when you look at the approach that the Commission takes, then it is very much an open, transparent and regular dialogue, as it should be, with regards to these organizations. But the question is, of course, what do you do with it once the information comes to the Commission? And our our office is an entry point, can be an entry point, doesn't have to be. I mean, there's also dialogue going on between organizations, part of this dialogue directly, and this is perfectly fine. It is not, said that the organization of dialogue needs to go only through one door. But I think it is important to understand that the dialogue partners have all the more to say and to bring when they coordinate a bit among themselves beforehand. So when you come with a joint proposal to the Commission, let's say between the Catholics or Protestants or between different religious, non-religious organizations, then you automatically have a louder voice, because what you have to be aware of is that you're competing with a lot of other voices and stakeholders, interest groups, lobbyists that have also specific interests. So part of our role has been to make sure that when we get information and positions of dialogue partners, to make sure that they find their way into the policy making processes with regards to the colleagues in other departments, for example, to make sure that there is a information flow. But again, it's one among many voices.
And Katharina, you just mentioned an aspect that kind of anticipates the next question. Article 17 is not about interfaith dialogue, but rather between dialogue between the individual churches and institutions or non-confessional organizations and the European institutions. However, recently a friend working at the Parliament told me that the dialogue, in fact, in a way, facilitates also interfaith cooperation and interfaith dialogue between churches. Do you agree with this statement? And do you have any positive example to share?
Yes, I mean, certainly, those who are in dialogue with us, they come to meetings, to briefings, they meet each other. And that means that from that also new collaborations and new cooperations then can be possible. It's not our first aim, and it's not the responsibility of the EU institutions, and it shouldn't be, to organize civil society, but we welcome it, and certainly it can be also very symbolic. So last Friday we had the mentioned dialogue seminar on the future of Europe, where we brought together representatives from the religious side and the non-confessional side, and of course at the reception people mingle and talk, and I think this is a very positive side effect.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Katharina, looking at Europe today, what are the main challenges the EU is facing and the priorities of the Commission? And are there anyone in particular of these challenges and priorities where you see that churches may play a role specifically because of the way they are and what they are?
Yes, Europe is facing a lot of challenges in different fields. But I think what is pertinent to this dialogue, and what we have also raised in our discussions over the past years, is first of all the growing diversity, and how to make sure that it is not a stumbling block, but that it is really seen as something enriching, which means we need certain rules. We need to also agree on certain values. How do we actually fill the words that are there in the preambula of the Lisbon Treaty, like democracy, rule of law, solidarity, equality. How do we fill them with life? And I think there the religions and the non-confessional organizations have definitely an important role to play. Also with regards to the rise of populism, I think that again, it's there are maybe correct answers posed, but correct questions posed, but the answers are flawed. And there, I think, again, we see that both sides, religions and non-confessionals, have a very good way of putting the person, the human being, in the center of their action. And that is what needs to be done.
Thank you. One thing I've noticed in my time here in Brussels, it looks like religion, religious freedom, and the role of churches in societies do not attract the media or media interest in particular. It seems that their instances are not matters of interest to the media representatives here in Brussels, unless there is a controversy involved or something that sparks their interest. Do you think that there is a particular reasons for it? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I was spokesperson for 5 years. I think bad news is always good news for the journalists, So this is not specific to the questions of religion or to the questions of this dialogue. I do think that on all sides, including also the representatives that are in the dialogue, there can be more effort to try to explain the fact that we are in a dialogue, because even that is not known. And it's actually very important, because there are people out there who think that we operate in this bubble far from the citizen. And in particular, with regards to this dialogue, it's not at all true. We're actually very much in contact with those who are the citizens. And the Commission and First Vice President Timmermans places a lot of importance to being in dialogue with citizens and to going beyond what is happening here in Brussels. And therefore, when we have dialogue seminars, for example, on specific issues, we make sure that we invite people from the member states and not only here in Brussels. And I think the fact that this is not known is unfortunate. And certainly, I think high-level leaders, for example, when they come to talk to us in the once a year, the annual meetings, I think if they could go back and give interviews to 2 or 3 of their national media, this could already change something. So, we have a press conference when we meet. We give the journalists the opportunity. There are, by the way, also very good interactions and questions to the religious leaders and the non-confessional representatives. So, it's improving, but there could be more done.
Thank you, Katharina. Moving on to your role as coordinator for combating anti-Semitism in the EU. This is a fairly young position, December 2015. How was it created, and what are your main responsibilities? And will you still be coordinator?
Yes, so I will keep this responsibility. It was created in December 2015 after we have been seeing a constant rise of anti-Semitic incidents in many EU countries, which culminated, I would say, in the attacks in 2015 in Paris, where next to Charlie Hebdo, we had an attack on a Hyper Kasher, which is a kosher shop in Paris, and the attack took place because they were Jews. So the fact that we have not only seen an increase of these horrific fatal attacks, but also in general an increase in incidents on people, that people don't feel safe anymore to walk with a kippah in certain areas of our big cities, that they are afraid to send their children to public schools because they might be attacked. All these issues have led to the fact that in 2015, when the new Commission came in, there was a clear political will to say, and we are stepping up our efforts on all levels to fight this. And this has been my main responsibility, to explore the various avenues to see how we can to fight this pernicious hatred. Together, by the way, with a coordinator on combating anti-Muslim hatred, where we have also seen a very worrying spike of attacks.
And Katharina, how prevalent is anti-Semitism in European societies today? And in your experience, what have you found are the main reasons for anti-Semitism today? Why is it still prevailing in many of our societies?
So with regards, let's say, to the data collection, it's always difficult because we think that there is quite a big number still of underreporting. People don't necessarily want to go to the police. But where we have been, where there has been recording, let's say on national level, for example, in the UK, we see at the moment a spike of 3 anti-Semitic incidents per day. And that's enormous, because also the Jewish communities across Europe are tiny in comparison to the rest. Mm-hmm. So definitely there is an increase in incidents, but there's also an increase in the way anti-Semitic feelings are harbored. So you see that it goes more into the middle of society. It used to be at the fringes, right-wing extremism, neo-Nazism, this is where we used to see anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. We have seen it also on the left when it comes to a conflation of Israel bias with regards to anti-Semitism. But the fact that this thinking, Jews control the world, Jews control our media, that in fact Israel is responsible for the anti-Semitism here, that this is very much present now in the middle, and that's very worrying.
It is. Now, after 18 months in the job, what do you think are the most meaningful ways to prevent anti-Semitism today and other forms of religion intolerance? Well, we have explored various avenues now. First of all, we have legislation in place, a framework decision on racism and xenophobia since 2008, that member states have to transpose, but not only transpose, but also apply. And so we think that one avenue is to make sure that this legislation, which, for example, prohibits Holocaust denial when inciting to violence and hatred, is prohibited, and therefore when it happens it also needs to be prosecuted. So we think that there needs to be training for police, for judges, for prosecutors to know what anti-Semitism and other forms of hate crime are nowadays. Then we also have tackled online hate speech, because according to this legislation, there are limits to free speech in Europe because of our history and the Holocaust. Where the limitations are when there is when speech is inciting to hatred and violence, and we say that what is illegal in the real world must be illegal online, and therefore we have started to tackle this in a code of conduct with IT companies, brought together the big ones, Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft and YouTube, to ensure that they, within 24 hours, revise and if necessarily remove illegal hate speech that is flagged to them. And now we are seeing to the fact that this is actually also implemented. And then you have a lot of other possibilities, funding good projects, for example, between different communities, but also, and that's maybe the most important and most long-term arm, is in education. To ensure that in schools, first of all, teachers recognize anti-Semitic incidents when it happens. So it's not just the history teacher that needs to know, but also the sports teacher. And they need to be trained to that. They need to be also given the instruments to face anti-Semitism in multicultural classrooms, which is not so easy. And then that students don't only hear about the negative sides of Judaism in Europe, only about the Holocaust or the Shoah, but that they know and to hear also about all the positive contributions that Jews have brought to Europe throughout the centuries, and what it means to live as a Jew in Europe today. So we need to have this holistic approach. You have listed a lot of initiatives. Hopefully, you mentioned member states. Hopefully, they will implement those framework decisions and the work with the social media companies. Yes. Looks to be a gigantic work to do in monitoring all that is said online. There was a provocative question that I asked last time, which I'd like to ask you again. It's that was posed: if I'm not Jewish, if I'm not a Muslim, but I don't dislike either group. In fact, I get along with all of them. Should I still be concerned with anti-Semitism and Islamophobia? Why should it be a problem for me, and why should the public be concerned or do something about it?
You know, I think that hatred never stays in one corner. So if you think today, Islamophobia doesn't concern me because it's only against the Muslims, or anti-Semitism doesn't concern me because the Jews have been pested for so many centuries, and it doesn't concern me. It's just not true, because in the end, and we see it in particular, for example, at the moment on online, in the online world, this kind of hatred very quickly spills over in other forms of intolerances. And in the end, it's not the kind of living together that we want. Yeah? What does it help me to live in peace if my neighbor is discriminated all the time? It will, in the end, have a negative effect on me. So we are very much convinced that fighting anti-Semitism is not, in the first place, a responsibility of the Jews, but of society at large.
Thank you. Speaking of society, you also, going back to the question before, you mentioned the social media giants in monitoring the online world. Is there anything else that traditional media, or the media in general, can do to increase or reduce anti-Semitism and Islamophobia?
Well, this is like with all other aspects as well. You need to have journalists that are well informed and that check the facts. And when you check the facts, then very often you see that it is a very complex picture. And that is certainly true when it comes to the question of how Jews and Muslims live in Europe today. How, for example, the attacks, what kind of impact they have had on these two communities in particular. And I think that it's important to recognize that. And with regards to anti-Semitism, there is also the specific aspect of not conflating the conflict in the Middle East as a justification for anti-Semitism here. It's just simply unacceptable, and we saw it recently in a very astonishing court judgment when 3 Palestinians threw Molotov cocktails into the synagogue in Wuppertal, and the judge ruled that yes, it was a criminal act, but no, it wasn't anti-Semitic because it was an expression of their political opinion. I don't think we would accept that kind of explanation in any other circumstances, that a conflict somewhere else in the world justifies violence in Europe. So I think it is very important, and that's important also for the journalists to understand how complex the situation is, and that anti-Semitism here against Jews is simply intolerable.
Thank you, Katharina. Well, thank you for answering our questions. We have time for a couple of questions from our audience. We have Andrew from the Quaker Council for European Affairs, who is asking, what can other faith groups do to join efforts to reduce anti-Semitism? And the next question, so you can take both. And Ralph from Germany is asking, what's your take on the French-German broadcaster Arte's initial refusal to broadcast a documentary about anti-Semitism?
Mm-hmm. Well, what can other faith organizations do? I think, coalition building and standing up for each other is a very important part in that. We have actually financed initiatives, for example, by the European Union of Jewish Students that work together with the Armenians and the Roma, to both or three groups that have experienced genocide and now live in the diaspora, to stand up for each other when they are being under pressure. And I think this can be done with a lot of faith groups, to be able to support each other. And it is always very powerful when groups of different background come together and stand there for a common cause, which is in the end a society in which we all want to live. So yes, I think this is very important to support this also from our side. And with regards to Arte, I think it was exactly an issue of what I said before, the conflation between Israel bias and hatred towards Israel and an opinion on Israel on the one side, and the projection of that to Jews here in Europe. I think it's very important to see that, for example, Jewish students in universities should be able to study just as freely as any other student, despite the fact that there is a conflict going on, and we see that same infiltration there with the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, for example. So it's important to see the correlations, but to keep the repercussions apart.
Well, thank you very much. I think this answers the question, and thank you very much, Katharina, for joining us. And thank you also for all of you who have participated, who have asked questions and joined us. We will come back with more live interviews after the summer. In the meantime, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletters or follow on our pages to stay up to date with our activities. Thank you very much for watching.